Communion is normally the happiest part of our services, right? Guys, let's settle down. Settle down. This is a sobering moment. Let me help you out. Anybody ever has a sobering word from the Lord, not from the Lord? Guys, you need to clean up your hearts before you come to the table. I'm like, I thought the table cleaned me up. Do you realize we have gotten 99% of communion sermons absolutely wrong backward? I don't say this in a critical way, but Jesus does. Look, when Paul says, check your hearts before you come to the table, the word in there actually has to do with anxiety. He's saying, don't be anxious when you come to the table. Check all the anxiety out. Don't you know you belong at this table? He says, why do you think some of you are sick? You're eating in an unworthy manner. You don't recognize your worth. He's not saying you are unworthy. He's saying you're not recognizing your worth. You belong at this table. Your name is written on the table. You belong here. Amen. We boldly approach the throne of grace. Man, I'm telling you what, people get nervous during my communion services. They didn't know you're allowed to have that much fun. We will fly them into your mouth like an airplane. So much glory. We're going to have a drunken, mystical communion service tomorrow. It is going to be hammered. But let me say this. During communion, and this is the last word, seriously, and this is my preacher wind down for the session. During communion, really, you know, if we look at our Catholic brothers, we needed a Reformation. We still need Reformation. During the Reformation, you know, the Catholics were, you know, worshiping the bread with a parade down the street, and it was really superstitious. But the Reformers took the opposite ditch. And the Reformers, they said communion is only a symbol. But Martin Luther would not agree with them on that one. He agreed with all the other points of the Reformation. But he was sitting with those guys in Switzerland. He slammed his hand on the table. He walked away that day. He had written, "This is my body." We look at Luther for these great things, rediscovering a doctrine of grace and translating the Bible into German. And most people don't realize the last half of Luther's life, all he did was to defend the mystery of the Lord's table against the extreme reformers who said it was only a symbol. Listen, communion is not a symbol. It is a sacrament. Everybody say sacrament. Now, if you're a charismatic, you don't know what that word means. That's okay. Sacrament is a visible, tangible representation of the grace of God. Think about marriage, okay? Paul does not say the husband and wife are like Christ in the church. He says this is a mystery, sacrament. The husband and wife, this is Christ in the church. He doesn't say this is like my body. He says this is my body. As a sacrament. Amen? See, marriage, we call marriage a covenant. If it's just a covenant, an agreement between two parties, it's bound to fail, at least on the inside. But it is a sacrament, a visible representation of the grace of God. And trust me, if your marriage is going to last, you need a little bit of grace. Amen? Do you know how many miracles happen at the Lord's table? I'm talking some crazy, weird, wild stuff. There was a guy named Wade Taylor. He passed away back in the 90s or early 2000s or something. He was a prophetic guy. And he started taking communion every day. And all of his hair grew back on his bald head. And it went from gray to black without any dye. Now, if that was a formula, I would have tried it. And Teresa of Avila, we mentioned her last night, the one that floated off the ground. Teresa of Avila, when she would take communion, she would just go into these ecstasies, hammered drunk. People would come from kilometers away just to watch her take communion. And it was such a crazy scene that they made her sit in the back of the room, like in the back of the church. She was not allowed to take communion publicly. So imagine a little Catholic girl who loves her communion. And the priest is giving the wafers to everybody else, and she's just sitting in the back of the room just watching. And then suddenly, a wafer floats out of his hand, flies to the back of the room, and lands in Teresa's mouth. After that, no more detention for Teresa. Amen.